Rhéal Fortin wants answers from Bill Blair on the invocation of the Emergency Act. Why didn't you have a plan to prevent this from happening? You knew this convoy was coming, yet you didn't follow recommendations. The Emergency Act did nothing magical that police services couldn't accomplish. We all saw it on TV. Here's the clip.
Maybe it's one of the clearest we've had so far, and it's appreciated. But I would like to know, the convoy that came to Ottawa to block Wellington Street had been announced for a while. We agree on that. I read that in January, on the 20th of January, I have an article saying that, well, next Friday, that was a week before, truckers would gather at Saint-Théophile in Chaudière-Appalaches, Saint-Ballon in Austrie, before they meet on Highway 40 in the west of Montreal to head to Ottawa. On that day, they would have colleagues from other provinces. The Ottawa demonstration should culminate around midday. That is what is planned. That was planned. So newspapers were talking about a convoy coming to Ottawa, grouping many people from elsewhere in Canada and maybe from the U.S. And that was 1 week before. You as minister, what happens at the cabinet meeting? Does somebody speak up to say something has to be done to prevent that situation?
Thank you very much for the question. I think it's an important point of clarification of responsibility. First of all, lawful peaceful protests take place every day in this country. And Canadians have, under the Constitution and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the right to engage in lawful peaceful protest. In every case, it is the responsibility of the police of jurisdiction in order to police that event, to facilitate that lawful peaceful protest, but also to maintain public order and ensure that the rule of law is maintained and public safety is maintained. And so I was aware that the police of jurisdiction, because it was a public announced event, but I don't believe, Mr. Fortin, that they did have a full appreciation of the nature. This wasn't just a protest. With great respect, it was a blockade. It was an encampment, and it was fortified by these big trucks. And when they came, I think in my conversations with the police, this did not meet their expectations of what was going to transpire. They were prepared to police a protest, but this evolved very quickly into something more than a protest. It became an occupation.
I'm sorry, I don't want to be impolite, but our time is counted. I understand that. But should I take it that really at the cabinet meeting, when you saw that the convoy was headed to Ottawa, to the Hill, you said we are not intervening. It's the Ottawa Police Services that have to deal with that. At no point did you think that something had to be done to prevent that situation?
Like I think all Canadians, I have opinions, but I also am very mindful that my responsibility as a cabinet minister is not to in any way direct the police, certainly the police of jurisdiction, who are governed by provincial statute and not by the federal government.
We are talking about the Parliament Hill, the Parliament of Canada. You have trucks telling you a week before, we are headed there and we are going to block Parliament. And you say, well, that's the jurisdiction of the Ottawa Police Services. Is that what you're saying?
And if I may, it is ultimately the responsibility of the police of jurisdiction, but they have every ability to, and do frequently. There's strong collaborative relationships I'm aware of, because I've been part of them in the past in a different role, of collaboration between all orders of policing, both municipal, provincial, and federal. They work together and they support each other. But I will tell you, Mr. Fortin, I do not believe it appropriate for the government, a politician, to give direction to the police on how to police this event. We make sure that they have the resources and the authorities that they require, but it's their job to make those decisions.
At that point, if this were to happen again, Mr. Blair, let's say that Friday this week, newspapers announce that in a week, there's going to be a load of trucks coming to block Wellington Street and Parliament. Should I take it that you will say, well, we'll leave it up to the Ontario and Ottawa Police Services. We are not going to intervene. You don't have any plan to prevent such situations from happening? No other measure will be taken? It's going to be like in January or in February?
No, let me be very clear. First of all, I am personally confident that law enforcement and those security officials responsible for Parliament Hill have learned some lessons from what has transpired, and they saw the difficulty that they encountered here, and I have some confidence that they'll respond appropriately. I will also tell you, because I'm aware there's important discussions taking place within Parliament at Proc, for example, and there is other work taking place to look at how we can perhaps deal with the entire Capitol Hill precinct in a more effective way.
Il y a effectivement des démarches.
Of course, there are approaches and committees sitting on it, but nothing is being provided for by the government. I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Blair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Minister, I see letters that you've just distributed. Dated 5th of February, one from the Premier of Manitoba and the other from the Premier of Alberta, who apparently are overwhelmed by the situation. But when you proclaimed the Emergencies Act, in the annex to the proclamation, there was the consultation of premiers regarding the Emergencies Act. Did you read that consultation at that time? And for Alberta, it said that the Premier of Alberta declared on Twitter that the government of Alberta was opposed to the invocation of the Emergencies Act. He opposed it on the 14th of February. We are talking about Manitoba. The Premier of Manitoba declared that the situation varied depending on the province and territory and said that the declaration, she was not convinced at the time that the Emergencies Act should be applied in Manitoba. Given the extensive scope of the Act, she was of the opinion that it was not constructive to implement the Act in Manitoba. On the 14th of February, the two premiers from Manitoba and Alberta say, no, we don't need the Emergencies Act. But it's invoked. Don't you find that surprising?
Well, frankly, no, Mr. Fortin. I'm not surprised by it. What I can tell you is that there is a requirement under the Emergencies Act that consultation take place with the ministers. That consultation did take place.
Mais vous n'avez pas suivi les recommandations.
But you did not follow the recommendations, clearly. I have a minute left. I'm sorry, Mr. Blair. I'm very impolite. I'm sorry. But we don't have enough time. We saw that when the police officers unblocked Wellington Street here in Ottawa, there was nothing magical. There was no helicopters, the army, no squads, nothing like that. Police officers came very calmly, very slowly, and they evacuated the demonstrators. And there were tow trucks that moved the trucks. There's nothing there that made me think, wow, the Emergencies Act did something wonderful. It was a simple police operation, something that you must have done during the G20 events or during other events. Could you tell me how this evacuation of Wellington Street was derived from the implementation of the Emergencies Act?
Sir, I think there were some very important provisions that were made available to the police that supported their resolution of that event. And for example, they were able to get tow trucks for the first time. They weren't previously.
Excuse, Monsieur le Ministre, je veux pas savoir.
I'm sorry, Mr. Minister. I don't want to know what was possible. What was done in reality? Were emergency measures used to unblock Wellington Street? That did not seem to be the case when we watched TV.
With the time.